Hi, everyone. Welcome officially to our reading. My name is Hayla Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so pleased to welcome you to today's reading of new contemporary fiction. We'll be hearing from Robin D'Amato reading from Sugar Free, a novel, released May 14th. Graydon D. Hubbard reading from Network Apprentice, Behind the Scenes in Talk Television, released June 11th. And W.A. Polf reading from Not the Same River, Stories, releasing August 3rd. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, the books can be ordered on Atmosphere Press's website. That's at atmospherepress.com/books. I'm just going to put those links in the chat for you too, so you can directly check those out too. At the end of today's event, we are going to have time for audience questions. So during the readings, if you've got a question for one or more of our authors, just go ahead and type those in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. And then during the reading itself, please stay muted to keep extraneous sound at a minimum. Of course, you can certainly feel free to use the chat for any praise and comments in addition to your questions. One last note before we begin is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. With that, I just want to thank everyone one more time for tuning in and supporting Robin, Dee, and Bill today. We are going to start off with our first reader now, who is Robin D'Amato. Connecticut-born, Robin moved to New York City to attend New York University, fell in love with the city, and never left. She has worked in the publishing industry as a Macintosh pre-press specialist since 1984, and also spent several decades pursuing dance and choreography. Her first novel, Somebody's Watching You, won a 2021 Second Quarter Firebird Book Award for fiction, and her second novel, Don't Poke the Bear, was a 2023 Page Turner Awards finalist. She currently lives in Manhattan's East Village with her 3,000 LP music room and her two cats. Visit her website at www.robindamato.com. Today, we'll be hearing from Sugar Free. In this novel, Ginny Eastman was 6 years old when her older brother handed her a basketball, starting her athletic journey in 1966. Despite her petite stature, Ginny discovered an innate talent for bouncing and running. However, her aspirations faced an unexpected challenge when juvenile diabetes entered her life, threatening to shatter her dreams. Robin, with that, take it away.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Hello. I'm going to show the cover of my book. It is sugar-free. It may be backwards, I'm not sure. Just a little heads up, the book covers Ginny's life from age 6 to age 60. What I'm going to read now is from chapter 2. She is about to turn 8. I think everything else is self-explanatory, and I do need to use my reading glasses to do this. Okay. Chapter 2, Flying Blindly. Ginny wasn't happy when she returned home, even though that's where she thought she wanted to be. Her parents were doting on her, and it was making her crazy. She couldn't say anything, of course. They were as upset as she was, maybe more so. That didn't mean they had to smother her. Her parents were so afraid of sugar that they ordered food with no sauce at Chinese restaurants and hamburgers at McDonald's with no ketchup so they could add their own. They bought sugar-free ketchup, sugar-free salad dressing, sugar-free soups, sugar-free sauces, and whatever else they could find that was labeled sugar-free. Ginny was thankful for cyclamates. They were ubiquitous, and Jenny felt less like a weirdo since she was consuming something other kids were eating too. The doctor explained that her new medicine was long-acting, with peaks for breakfast and lunch. A second insulin would kick in the late afternoon, covering dinner and overnight. That way, Ginny wouldn't have to take insulin 4 times a day anymore. Unfortunately, this system caused another peak in the afternoon when the insulins overlapped, and then before sleep, around 10 or so. She would have to eat snacks to ward off hypoglycemia. Ginny's mom used something called diabetic exchanges to plan meals. Sometimes the meals would be too much food, causing Ginny's urine test to be positive for glucose. Sometimes they wouldn't be enough, causing hypoglycemia. Overall, though, the system worked well enough, and Ginny was getting used to it. I want to go outside and practice. Do you think that's a good idea? Her mother said. Why don't you stay in? Ginny started to tear up. Asher said to practice. Her mother thought a moment. Her daughter needed this. Well, okay, be careful. If you feel that anything's wrong, come in. I'll call you when it's time for your snack. Ginny's father had attached a basketball hoop to the side of the house for Asher several years earlier. When Ginny was 6, she would sit on the sidelines and watch her older brother Asher and his friends play. One day, after his friends had left, Asher said, "Want to play?" Ginny turned out to be a natural dribbler, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make a basket even when she was right under the hoop. The ball hardly left her hands. "You know, it's your arms," he said. She threw again, and this time he helped her shot get into the basket. "My arms?" "Yeah, they're not strong enough. That's why you can't reach the basket." Asher tossed the ball onto the grass. "Come here." They settled on a flat part of the lawn. "Push-ups," he said. He did a couple to demonstrate. "You try." She did one, fell to the grass on her second attempt, giggling. "Yeah, no arm strength. That's your problem." "It's not because I'm too short?" "Well, that too, but let's work on something we can change." She tried again. This time she was able to do 2. "I prefer bouncing and running." "That's because you're good at that. When you get better at this, you'll like it too." Ginny was doubtful, but decided to believe him. "Come on," he said, "let's go back to bouncing and running." As they played, Asher would help Ginny's shots into the basket. Ginny and Asher played that way throughout the spring. A few months later, Asher was drafted and went away. Even so, Ginny kept practicing. When it became too cold to play outside, she kept up with her push-ups. "Push-ups," Ginny said now. She got up to 5, which pleased her. She'd have to practice harder for when Asher came home. Running and bouncing, bouncing and running. She dribbled in the circle, and every time she came near the basket, she threw the ball in the air towards the side of the house, like Asher had taught her. She still wasn't anywhere near the hoop, but she didn't care. She kept practicing, trying to throw the ball higher and higher. When she got dizzy going in one direction, she switched hands to bounce and run the other way. Dribbling with her left hand was hard. She needed to practice that. "Ginny, come in for your snack." She stopped dribbling. The interruption destroyed her concentration. "Ginny, now." One of the problems with taking insulin was that exercise could lower blood sugar. While Ginny was bouncing and running, she was potentially bringing on hypoglycemia. She hated to admit her mother was right. She felt lightheaded and running was more difficult. She tossed the ball into the garage and went inside. Ginny had missed 3 weeks of school, but her 2 best friends, Tilly Quain and Renee Nouvelle, said they would help her catch up. There was a definite pecking order in her class, and Ginny was worried that by being out, she had lost her place. She was used to being one of the smartest in the class, not as smart as Renee, but definitely smarter than that kid Bobby, although he would never acknowledge it. The playground for the lower grades was overdue for renovation. The kids who played there would trip on the crumbling pavement. The swings chains creaked loudly with rust. The painted lines for hopscotch and foursquare were fading away. There were no immediate plans to repave, de-rust, or repaint, however. Today, the intense afternoon sun was making Tilly's bright red hair appear to be on fire. One could have spotted her from a satellite. Tilly had never known her father, but people around town would say her hair color had come from him, as her mother was Sicilian and a dark brunette. Renee, in comparison, was a chocolate brown skinned beauty from one of the maybe 2 Black families in town. Ginny, with her dirty blonde approaching brown hair, never felt as unique as her 2 friends, but she wouldn't have wanted that kind of attention Renee got for being Black. When people commented on her skin color, Renee would insist defensively that she was tanned, not Black, until someone, it was Ginny, who immediately regretted it, pointed out that most people don't stay tan throughout the winter. It was hard for Ginny to admit, but most of the time she felt unwell. Sometimes she felt irritable and sluggish. Other times she felt lightheaded and confused. She just wanted to feel like herself again. She felt closest to normal when she was bouncing and running, but even that often ended with her getting weepy and weak. Maybe she was just thinking about it too much. Maybe she needed more distractions. Her 8th birthday was coming up May 20th, and because it was a Saturday, her mother planned a party. Besides Tilly and Renee, Ginny's mother invited other kids from Ginny's 2nd grade class. There were presents and games, and best of all, her mother guaranteed there would be a cake she could eat. First, her mother brought out a traditional layer cake with thick chocolate buttercream frosting and 8 candles on it that read, "Happy birthday, Ginny." That was for the guests. Then she brought out a special cake for Ginny. It hadn't risen very well. Baking with artificial sweeteners was difficult, and there was no frosting. It looked a lot like something someone might get from an easy bake oven, only bigger and not as symmetrical. It wasn't fluffy. It wasn't creamy. It was kind of dry. However, it tasted all right. Ginny could live with that. The academic year ended with Ginny's place near the top of the class secured, thanks to Tilly and especially Renee. In July, to regain a semblance of normalcy, Ginny's parents planned a trip to Cape Cod. This would be the 2nd family vacation without Asher. Last year, he said, now that he was almost 18, he was too old to go with them. Ginny didn't speak to him for a week after that. Then he was drafted. Having breakfast out was an Eastman family favorite pastime, one of the many perks of being on vacation. Their first morning there, however, they couldn't get in the door of the motel diner. After waiting, her father went to ask how much longer it would be. "Another hour," he reported. "Let's find a different place." The next diner they drove to was also crowded. Ginny was starting to feel strange, like a sensation she'd have before her knees would bend by themselves. "Let's not wait," her mother said. They got a table at the next place. Ginny wasn't feeling so great. She didn't think she could speak anymore, and her eyes were starting to twitch. They were darting all over, making it hard to focus. "Could you bring an English muffin right away? She's a diabetic." Ginny didn't mind her father mentioning her condition if it stopped what was happening. In a minute, there was an English muffin in front of her. Her mother sprinkled some sugar on it. Ginny tried to take a bite, but found her throat was tightening. She put her head on the table. Someone brought a large orange juice, and her father helped her drink it down. Ginny waited for that lovely sensation of renewed energy. Instead, she vomited all over the table, and her body went into spasms. Her father grabbed her convulsing body and hurried towards the nearest exit. Ginny vomited again as they approached the car, this time over his shoulders and onto the pavement. Her mother got in the back seat with her so her father could drive. Ginny's survival instincts kicked in. Whatever you do, stay awake. A healthy amount of stubbornness was keeping her conscious. It was possible she was shaking more violently because she refused to succumb. The car stopped. They were at the hospital. Her father carried her in, and soon she was lying on a table surrounded by people in white coats who were holding her down as she thrashed around. She felt a needle go in her arm, and she thought, "Okay, they got me." And she let everything go black. That's it.
Thank you so much, Robin. I feel like we got such a huge range and breadth of emotion and exposure in just that short reading. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Reading next today is Graydon D. Hubbard. All bestsellers, Graydon D. Hubbard's previous works include Slim to None, Charlie's Pride, and At the Altars of Money. All of his books and a number of his short stories have received literary awards. Hubbard spent 2 years in the military, 32 years as a CPA, eventually managing the largest audit practice in the Mountain West, and 20 years as director and board designated financial expert for 2 public companies. He has held roles as director or trustee for 12 educational and civic organizations. D has conquered 29 of Colorado's 14ers and explored 25 of Scotland's Munros. Adding to his impressive journey, D has also been to a podium deep in the heart and soul of Wall Street to help ring the bell that opens the New York Stock Exchange. Today, we will be hearing from the latest book that D has released, Network Apprentice. Follow Julie Anders as she navigates the complexities of earning a master's degree in broadcast journalism and enduring a frustrating apprenticeship. Her journey surprisingly turns when she finally receives the recognition she deserves. Challenging adventures then take Julie to amazing places. Let's hear more now from Dee.
Okay, might start a little bit differently. I'm going to lay claim to be the first author ever to feature a grizzly bear beginning a contemporary novel and dominating its first chapter with his point of view. So this is from chapter 1, La Bear's Feast, September 2011. Like an aging satyr who indulged too much the night before, he naps all morning, sprawled spread eagle, tongue lolling, drool pooling, flies circling, guts rumbling, continuous snores and occasional belches spew from his open mouth. Gluttonous dreams dance in his head. Then I'm going to skip to chapter 6. This is from Julie's thesis presentation rehearsal in August of 2019. So we're advanced 8 years. Here's my bottom line conclusion. The Affordable Care Act provisions intending to limit and control premiums charged by participating insurance companies actually enable exactly the opposite. This act incentivizes insurance companies to maximize direct health care costs, which I'll hereinafter refer to as DHC. And it's obviously in insurers' best interest to maximize DHC rather than to help control them. Here's how it works. The act requires insurers to rebate premiums to the extent they result in recoveries of overhead and profit in excess of specified percentages of DHC. Worded a different way, but with the same result, in setting premiums, insurers are permitted to add to premiums specified percentages of DHC to cover overhead and profit. This creates a cost plus a percentage of cost contract, obviously encouraging insurance companies to maximize DHC in order to enhance their profits. A friend of my dad's who spent a few years auditing government contracts tells me cost plus a percentage of cost contracts with the US government are illegal for obvious reasons. So our Congress has actually enacted a law establishing a massive illegal system of contracts with insurers. The act is an example of government excess in full bloom. How many members of Congress didn't bother to read it, i.e. how many were negligent, and how many did read it or rely on their staff to read it, i.e. how many were too incompetent to comprehend what they read or had incompetent staff do the reading. There's another possibility. I'm wrong. I'm just a young person who cares and is trying to finish my college education and get on with my afterlife. This is from chapter 13, USA is bankrupt. We're now in October of 2019. Good, Julie. And now before we dive into your first week on the job, I need to brief you on programming realities in this business. Danny's playful FaceTime smile departs. A grim visage and pursed lips replace the screen image. Like most other network talk shows, evening program at MRABC centers around what's perceived as current events, particularly late-breaking and attention-grabbing events. Dramatic and disturbing events are the kings of commentary. With adroit presentation, they can be elevated in the minds of viewers to systemic national problems or overwhelmingly disastrous and crisis situations. Those events always take precedence over pre-planning and may dominate my show for a string of evenings. What's important to our network brass is to seduce our audience into an "oh my God" reaction and keep them glued to the screen. Aberrant behaviors in our society are highlighted, even though most of them can't be rationally extrapolated to endemic societal problems worth a broad public concern. Actually, even our kings of commentary are also preempted regularly by the absolute monarch of all primetime television news shows, the queen of commentary. And she is, of course, in one simple word, politics. She's very seductive to many viewers, and as in the ancient game of chess, she's also more powerful than all the kings. Mostly, Queen Politico lives forever, never leaves the public scene, and is more adept than any other subject in dispensing divisiveness, agitating the insecure, promoting paranoia, and excessively influencing impressionable minds of others. When it comes to programming for the public stage, the national hyper-focus on politics has engulfed and infected talk television in a highly contagious and insidious disease. There's very little unbiased political commentary left in nightly news programming. Too much of it lacks in-depth substance and overly focused on the 4 defining Ds of political news commentary purpose, namely, defame, debase, demonize, and destroy a targeted political figure. Political scene commentaries dispense never-ending streams of fear and loathing. It concerns me that, like most of our competition, my network brass seem overly committed to political bias, and political neutrality is a difficult concept for them to accept. I try to maintain neutrality in my own commentary and also try to bias balance the guests on my show, something our competition rarely does. But these days, I have regular conflicts with my network brass about this approach. Now I skip to chapter 14, excessive regulatory zeal. This is in October of 2019. It's an email from Julie. Okay, Danny, here's my summary. Congress has enacted 4.4 to 6 million words in the new laws in each 2-year session since the end of World War II. So in 36 sessions through 2018, that's about 180 million compulsory words added to the Federal Register by the legislative branch. Then there are rules and regulations added to the compulsory word count by federal agencies who administer the laws. Then there are laws, rules, and regulations dumped on citizens by individual states, counties, and cities. So there are billions of words out there attempting to regulate the behaviors and activities of people, businesses, schools, and other organizations. Also on the horizon, some pundits forecast that by 2035, half of America's workforce will have to be employed by government, be employed by businesses to deal with regulatory compliance, or be employed in law enforcement. It's also forecast that Americans will soon see laws of 3,000 plus pages, generating 1 million words plus each, perhaps even 5,000 plus pages and more on one law. It's rumored that there's a $500 annual award funded by Elon Musk to be presented each year to the most ferocious word generator in Congress. It's called the Augustus Legislator Award. No wonder my poli-sci-fi instructor calls the law originating branch of Congress the House of Absurdities. Dad's even worse. He calls it the House of Atrocities. On to chapter 16. What happens next? And this is November 19th. Herein, the author, that's me, lays claim to the world's shortest summarization of an ill-advised government proceeding. This is from Julie's brief on the Mueller investigation. First, as Angel Bright also informed us in class, know that a prominent judge once proclaimed that a clever prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. That's true. That's not fiction. Now, on to the indictments. There were 2 of them. A key political figure was indicted twice, once on 2 counts, tax evasion and lobbying for a foreign government without a license, then a second time for money laundering. The Justice Department settled for a conviction on tax evasion, brought in a few dollars if the convicted criminal had any dollars left, helped compensate the U.S. Treasury for the millions of dollars wasted on the investigation and litigation proceedings. The third indictment resulted in a bunch of misbehaving Russians scolded and kicked out of USA and sent home to Russia. That's it. Big deal. Case is closed. Then from chapter 19, this is Despair, December 12, 2019. Driving home the next day, Julie mostly dozes semi-comatose in the back seat of the car. She wakens as it eases through Boulder's main intersection of Broadway and Pearl Street. That's in Colorado. Her eyes stray west along the Pearl Street Mall. Finally, her tears flow. So little time we had together, Dad, she sobs. First, a chance encounter there in front of the Patagonia store. Then a holiday weekend at the Triple J family ranch. Then Jason is 3 months gone on a special assignment in Chile. We finally enjoy a soul-saving day in a hallowed place, and then our dreams of a future together are extinguished in the silence of the night. How do I ever get over this? You'll never get over it, Julie. Oh, it was so brief. Know always that in your short time together, what you two created for yourselves was beautiful. It will live in your memories forever, untouched by aging or by changes in circumstance. That's a good thing. And it's okay to cry, for tears are what you mix with laughter to nourish your soul. And this is from chapter 24, COVID-1. Monday, April 13th, 2020. Thanks, Alan. Julie's laugh is muffled, but I don't think I'll join you for that. I don't want to close my workday with another dose of what I left behind 3 months ago. And just so you know, I don't do political, never will. I'm issue-oriented, and I'm resolving never to name a political party or use the names of our current president or his predecessor on Judy's show. Those 4 words are too inflammatory. I get it, Julie. I don't do political either. As long as I'm a PBS station manager, there will be no rabidly partisan political bias in our programming, not on my watch. And then I'd like to conclude with a change of pace, if there's time. This is from chapter 11, The Devil's Causeway, circa 1000 BC. So here's a change of pace, place, time, and circumstance. On the highest sunlit ridge above the last grove of sunlit, wind disfigured pines at timberline, two figures trudge upward in silhouettes against the summer sky. The taller one leads, the smaller one follows closely behind. Shadows trailing, they travel where moccasined feet have not trod before, nor does a game trail guide their way. They're first to seek solitude's redemption in a place where the earth and heavens join. When they reach the ridge crest, they pause to rest, their chest heaving, their breathing labored. Ahead and expanding fan-like to 3 horizons is a broad alpine plateau. It images an immense mountain massif shorn of its peaks by some unimaginable force. Rippling in the wind, lush fields of grass cover a flattened, treeless vista. The pastoral landscape fills with open, sun-drenched spaces, vast, humble, and inviting. A transient presence of serenity, ever vulnerable to sudden storm. Clouds advance across the plateau, descend too closely, and threaten a forced mating of land with vapor. No rain yet falls, but a peaceful scene abruptly turns hostile and unforgiving. Serenity disappears. Darkness extinguishes the afternoon sun and envelops the sky. Light flees, and an earth no longer gilded relinquishes her splendor. Lifeless gray images tarnish the landscape turned barren by lost definition. As if rendered soulless by their vanished shadows, 2 figures shudder at what they see. Directly before them, a natural hazard interrupts passage to the plateau. Now gradually descending, their asset ridge pinches into a long, narrow causeway of canted and jumbled rock, rising from sheer cliff faces on both sides. Instinctively, the man turns around, raises an arm, and shields the boy with his elk-skin cloak, providing a fragile protection against the frightening way forward and the mounting fury of a summer storm beyond. Behind and below, their pathless way back widens into a beckoning pass. The man gazes over his shoulder and frowns. His eyes dance along the causeway, searching for a route across. Dare they attempt it? His head shake is barely perceptible. Then he returns his gaze to the pass and grimaces. Must he retreat to safety? Into shame? Another head shake. Uncertainty torments him. Reality threatens his aspirations. An angry gale now streaks across the plateau toward them. Over the causeway, it races loud and fierce like a pack of raging wolves. Lightning streaks the blackened heavens, and giant crooked arrows of fire strike close by, blinding them with unearthly brightness. Scorched air singes their throat and lungs. From rocks beside them, an electrical buzzing erupts, like the hiss and rattle of 100 venomous snakes. Booming thunder deepens them with ominous threats from God whose might, invisible stone mountains in the sky. The man gathers his son close to him and feels 2 small arms lock around his waist. In an appeal for mercy, he turns once more to face the storm, frees a hand and raises his palm toward the sky. But the tempest offers no abatement. A look of despair crosses his lined features. No, my son, he whispers hoarsely, we dare not cross and we cannot go around. It's a place for evil spirits, and we've been warned. No one should climb higher than the trees. Slowly, they retrace their steps, wind snarling around them, sleet spitting in their faces. The man weeps silently, but 2 tears trickle down his impassive face and reveal his lapse of stoicism. Disillusionment remains unforgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee, and thank you for giving us kind of a comprehensive overview. I think that kind of gives us a little bit more interest and dynamism, in the book. So thank you so much for that reading. Our final reader for today is W.A. Polf. William holds a BA from San Francisco State University and a PhD in American history from Syracuse University. He worked for the New York State American Revolution Bicentennial Commission and the Speaker of the New York State Legislature. He was an executive at Columbia University and spent 35 years in the Columbia University Presbyterian Hospital System in New York City. He retired as a senior vice president at New York Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan, and in 2018, he won second place in North Carolina's Doris Betts short fiction competition, awarded by the North Carolina Writers Network. His story was published by the North Carolina Literary Review Online and was nominated for a pushcart and for the best short stories online. The editors of The New Yorker wrote that there is much to admire in one of his stories. He published his first book of short stories, Magical Ballyglass and Other Stories, in 2012. Find out more at www.wapolf.com. Today, we're going to be hearing William read from Not the Same River, a latest collection of short stories. These stories involve ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, and the central theme these characters face is timeless. Do we shape the future, or does the future shape us? In the story William will read from today, The Gun Rack, a teenage boy becomes friendly with an elderly customer on his paper route who asks the boy for a favor that carries risks and raises ethical choices that challenge the boy's maturity. William, the virtual podium is yours.
Thank you, Hala. So, from The Gun Rack. Old Jessup wanted his newspaper close to the front door, and Bradley had figured out a way to do it without stopping his bicycle. He would head up the rutted driveway, loop around the turning circle worn into the hard-packed dirt, and pedal back close to the porch of the cabin, tossing the paper next to the door as he rode by. Today, as he approached up the drive, he saw Willard's pickup truck parked in the circle. Willard, old man Jessup's son, who came and went unpredictably and stayed in the shack by the garage when he was around. The truck sat slightly cockeyed. Bradley would have to slow down to maneuver by it. When he did, he noticed something against the shack, an unruly pile of wood, old boards, gray from weathering in the sun. The pile had clearly lain there for a long time, which surprised him. He had ridden past this point dozens of times without seeing it. Now it jumped out at him, like the dog next door lunging from the bushes. Today, Bradley didn't need to throw the paper on the porch. The old man was sitting there in his rocker, dozing. They had become friends, and sometimes Bradley would stop for a while to talk. Old Jessup came from the Oklahoma Panhandle, where Bradley's father grew up before his family fled the Dust Bowl for California. Bradley had a powerful curiosity about his father's boyhood. Sometimes old Jessup talked about Oklahoma, about growing up on the plains where life was hard. Bradley would try to picture his father there, a young version of the man in the photographs his mother kept on her dresser. Talking about Oklahoma made Bradley feel peaceful and calmer somehow, and he liked old Jessup for it. His mother was from Missouri. She called it back there and never talked about it. She knew nothing about Oklahoma. Bradley was grateful for what he learned from old Jessup. His father couldn't have told him. He had never known his father, he explained to the old man. Old Jessup nodded as though to say, go on. So Bradley said, he died in the war at Iwo Jima. The old man nodded again. The nod seemed to make it all right that Bradley told him, that the old man now knew about the empty space inside that Bradley could not fill. Then old Jessup spoke. The Japs killed my oldest boy. He sat, not speaking for a while. Roger, that was his name. but we called him Buster. He chuckled and repeated, Buster. He fell silent in his chair, rocking slightly, his eyes closed. Bradley waited for a while in case there was more to tell, but the old man had said nothing else. So Bradley left quietly, not wanting to disturb him. Today, Bradley stopped his bike and got off. Hello, he said. Hello back. The old man did not open his eyes. Bradley walked across the porch and extended the newspaper in his hand. Here's your paper, Bradley said. Finally, old man Jessup opened one eye and looked at Bradley. He said nothing, but took the paper. He closed his eye. That pile of wood by the shack, Bradley said. Could I take a couple of pieces? The old man looked at Bradley. What wood pile? His eyes sat deep in his face, like a boar's sunk into his fleshy cheeks. By the shack, it just looks like waste wood. At that, old Jessup sat straighter in his chair. There ain't no such thing as waste wood, he said. Wood's always good for something. I just meant it doesn't look like you need it. I could use some. Mr. Jessup rocked a little. The comment seemed to need deep consideration. For what? At school, I'm making a gun rack and wood shop. It sounded ridiculous when he said it. He didn't have a gun. But the shop teacher included a gun rack on the list of possible projects, and it looked pretty easy to build. For my room. Mr. Jessup started to cough. Bradley had seen this happen before. Fits would seize the old man for long moments. His red face turned purple as he hacked, and fluid rattled in his throat. Talking seemed to bring it on. Gassed in the trenches, he gasped once as Bradley watched, startled by the violence of the coughing. In the big war. Bradley knew he meant the First World War. He had been too old for the second. The old man's cough finally calmed down. You got guns, boy? The spasm had reduced old Jessup's voice to a hoarse whisper. Bradley yearned for a gun.
Oh, sorry, Bill. I think the mic accidentally muted.
Sorry.
All good.
How did that happen? I'll go back to the start of the paragraph, I guess. Bradley yearned for a gun. It seemed like every kid he knew had at least a .22. His friend Jay had a .410 shotgun. Bradley pressed his mother on it, provoking an argument. All his friends had guns, he said. His mother stood firm. She had gotten rid of his father's guns after he died. Guns have murdered enough people, she said, like your father. But that was in the war, Bradley protested. His mother laughed, a mocking sound. They kill each other around here too, she said. He wanted to say, my father would have said okay. But his nerve failed him. That ended the discussion, but the ache never went away. He was older now and more responsible. His mother liked his initiative in doing the paper route. She might change her mind if he asked again. It seemed possible, but he didn't know how to bring the subject up. Maybe building a gun rack would help break the ice. My mom says I can get a .22 when I'm 16, he lied to old Jessup. Next year, 2 years really, he said to himself. The old man didn't need to know that. The two lies bothered him a little, but he felt the need keenly. I want to build the gun rack now, to be ready. Old Jessup wheezed for a while. He looked down at the empty coffee can he used as a spittoon, but did not spit into it. He looked back at Bradley. So what's stopping you? Bradley stood there, uncertain what the old man meant. The response was vague. Had Mr. Jessup said yes to taking the wood or not? It was one of those ambiguous responses adults used to deflect questions. His mother did it a lot. We'll see. That was her most discouraging answer when he asked for something. It meant waiting until the desire wilted, stalling to make the question go away. The stack of wood pulled him. He would have to decide for himself. Bradley walked down the porch stairs and headed toward the shack, past Willard's pickup. The woodpile sat on the sunny side of the shack, the sun glinting on the surfaces of the boards. They had been thrown haphazardly into a pile, so Bradley studied them to figure out how to move the pieces. He approached it cautiously. A snake might have crawled underneath. He kept his muscles tense, ready to jump back as he gingerly handled the boards. But there were only some small snails sticking to the damper boards deeper in the pile. Bradley shifted the wood until he found 4 short planks, all about the same size, all relatively smooth and unmarked. Just what he needed, he thought, and pulled them loose. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice startled Bradley. He turned and saw Willard standing there. Willard's shirt sleeves had been cut off at the shoulder. A dark serpentine tattoo twisted up his right arm. Bradley stared at it. Even at a distance, he could smell whiskey on Willard's breath. "Mr. Jessup said I could have some boards," he said. His voice broke a little. He tried to control it. "I need it for school." Willard looked toward the porch where the old man sat watching. "It don't belong to him," Willard said. "It's mine." He glared at Bradley, his eyes bloodshot from the whiskey. The boards in Bradley's hands grew heavy. He wished he could just drop them and leave, but his muscles failed him, and he just stood. "It ain't for giveaway," Willard said. A wad of tobacco bulged in his cheek. "But I'll sell you some. For them boards you got, $2, and that's a good deal." Bradley searched his brain desperately for a way out. Maybe he should just run, get on his bike and speed away. But still, his strength failed him. He stayed rooted in place. He looked back to the porch, at Mr. Jessup sitting there, and silently begged him for help. Willard slouched, sucking the tobacco in his cheek, waiting. "Let the boy be." Old Jessup's croaking voice rumbled across the yard. "I told him okay." He peered fiercely at Willard. Bradley felt the intensity, even though it was not directed at him. Then the old man's eyes shifted to Bradley, and the ferocity faded. "Take your boards and get, boy," the old man said. Bradley hefted the boards, getting a better grip without looking at Willard. He hurried toward his bike, trying not to stumble on the uneven ground. "You still owe me $2, he heard Willard saying behind him. "Don't you forget."
Thank you so much, Bill. Yeah, I feel like that was a really good way to get kind of this microcosm look at the book, the collection overall. So yeah, thank you for that reading. At this time, we do have time for our audience Q&A. So if anyone has a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type that in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. We have already received a number of questions. So this first one is for you, Bill, actually. This one comes from JD. On your website, you say that your writing principles are to first take the story out of the words, then take the words out of the story. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Well, I guess it's a little glib, frankly, but I guess the point that I'm trying to make, the way I write, short stories are a type of writing that has its own demands. And particularly writing fiction, you have to do things differently than you do in working longer pieces of fiction. So the way I approach a story when I'm thinking about it is I sort of think about all of the words that could fit what I want to say, and I give myself a fairly free handle in writing those. So that's taking the story out of the words. But after I've finished that first draft and you get into the hard work of revision, my basic approach to revision, particularly in a short story, is to try to reduce the word volume in the story, because the story is, after all, short. And what you find, well, at least what I find, is that that kind of self-editing technique allows you to really sharpen your prose and sharpen your thinking, because whenever you can take two words out and put one back in, I just think that's better writing. So that's essentially what that means.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to kind of contain, honestly, some really good principles for any writer in this sort of like tagline. So, yeah, thanks for telling us about that. We're going to jump to a question we got for all three of all three of the authors. This person says, "You've all published lots of work even before this most recent book that you read from today. What is one valuable thing you've learned through years of publishing?" Maybe let's jump to Robin to start us off on this one.
I had a feeling you were going to pick me. I think I write better. I think I write easier than I used to. It used to be a real struggle. And the more I succeed and finish a project and then see it to fruition, the easier I find it to start the next one.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like the starting is always the hardest, and the start of the very start is definitely by far really hard.
Yeah. But then there's
Yeah.
that pesky middle that you when your head hits the wall and you think, oh God.
Yeah, exactly. A little too relatable.
Yeah. Yes.
Going back to Bill, what about you? What is one valuable thing you would say you've learned through years of publishing work?
Well, I think one of the main things is you have to be able to accept the fact that the industry doesn't hate you if they don't seem to appreciate your work. That's a hard lesson to learn, frankly. When I first started writing, I always thought everything I wrote was so perfect that I couldn't imagine anybody would miss it. But the reality is it's a big industry, and the reading public is a big public. And you have to make sure that what you write, you're writing to first satisfy yourself, and learn to discipline yourself. And as you get better at it, learn to appreciate yourself more, despite what may happen to the story when you finish it, And believe me, I have a stack of them that seem to be here for the eternity. But I think that's just one thing you have to appreciate.
Definitely, yeah. Dee, how about you chiming in? What's one valuable thing you've learned through years of publishing your work? Oh, it looks like you might still be muted, Dee. So it should here. Let's see if I can.
I'm sorry about that phone ringing. Okay.
No worries.
I can do this one really quick. Be persistent and develop tolerance for disappointment. And I might might be kind of interesting. After my first novel was published, I had a second novel written, and my publisher really wanted to do it. This was a small publisher on the West Coast, and I was still ambitious. And I said, I'll be honest and disclose it. And I've got one about done, but I'd still like to try to make a major publishing. His words were exactly, you got as much chance of landing a major publisher, even though you've had 2 books published already, as you do landing a Frisbee on the moon. 2 years later, I go back, my hat in my hand, And I say, you know, I tried, but I ran out of frisbees and the moon's too far away. Will you publish my second novel? So yeah, be persistent. Don't give up on yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's a great picture of what it can kind of be like in this landscape. That's perhaps a little intense of a metaphor, but yeah, but thank you for that. We've got another question. This is for Bill from Ruth. A novel is longer than a short story, but how long would you say is a short story?
That almost sounds like a conundrum. Um, well, I guess one thing you could say is that I think a short story should be something you can read in a single sitting, ideally. Um, but of course, people read at different rates and in different ways, so that doesn't really mean a lot. Um, if you look at sort of what the industry does out there, if you take a book like Not the Same River, for example, 15 stories, this is a 300-page book, which is about the size of a medium-sized novel, about 100,000 words. And there are 15 stories. So that's 15 stories is 20 pages per story, or about 6,000 words. And 6,000 words is a pretty good measure when you're thinking of submitting something. Places usually state requirements somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 words. Now there are a lot of there's right nowadays there's a lot of interest in what's called flash fiction, which are very short stories, always under 1,000 words, and in some cases under a few hundred words. But I think for a sort of classic short story approach, if you start getting up to 9,000 or 10,000 words, that's really a novelette. So I think the 5,000 to 7,000 word range is about right.
Yeah, I would say for the short stories that I've read, like that is definitely like a really great sweet spot. So, you know, plus and minus can happen, but yeah, that sounds good to me for sure. This is a question that came in a private message for Robin. I really enjoyed your reading. How do you create such evocative scenes that put the reader in the right time and place that you want to create the scene for?
I do a lot of research. I when I decided on this particular character, I actually had her be my age. So she is my age. 1966. It's the same, and that follows it. But then I realized I don't remember what was going on in 1966. I mean, I remember some things, but so lots and lots of research, lots of details, and they don't have to be tedious details. They just need to be enough scattered in there to paint your picture and bring you back to the time.
Yeah, I think there's like this kind of tendency to think that more is more is more is more. But yeah, when you have just like a few key details of even if it's only a few, if they are a key, it can do all that work for you in such a small space of time. So yeah, thanks for that. This is a question going back to one I missed from earlier, actually. This is for Bill from JD. Of the many characters and locales in your 15 stories, how many were based on individuals you actually know or locations you have visited?
Uh, that's a question that people often ask about. It's a where do you get your inspiration kind of question. I would say most of my stories are based on some reality of some kind, uh, and often my own reality. But sometimes it's not very much, it's a very small thing. The story that I was just reading from, for instance, is no more complicated than the fact that when I was a kid, I had a paper route. And on the paper route, there was an old man, and I used to talk to him. Uh, and it was, but nothing else in the story is in any way whatsoever connected to what actually happened. So I think all of the stories have some grounding in reality of some kind. And I think that's true of any writer, that you draw on your own experience, but your experience may be morphed and changed and added to in ways that make it no longer really your experience, but just simply something that was a starting place for you.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, it kind of, even if the picture is there, you know, you can extrapolate so much just based on the initial inspiration that way. So, it's kind of a nice way to do callbacks to things in your real life without being too limited by that necessarily. This is a question for all of you, asking to kind of pull back into your experiences at the editorial stage of writing your book. This person says, I have a callback appointment with a publisher for my unfinished story. What kind of questions should I ask? So I'm kind of wondering from all three of you, you know, what questions were really important for you to pose to your editors when you were at that stage of writing and publishing these books? How about we start with Dee?
I'm afraid you start with me. Repeat the question, please. What's the
Yeah, no
editorial?
problem.
I hate to answer a question, but what the hell's the
Yeah.
editorial stage?
Oh, yeah, when you have submitted your manuscript and you are talking with an editor about the text and any changes that you want to make before the book is officially released. What was really important for you to hear from an editor or to ask an editor?
Be frank with their criticisms. Be patient with the hesitancies and the uncertainties, and sometimes the fear of what the author is trying to do and accomplish. And be open to all suggestions, because you're dealing with people that may not only be aspiring writers themselves, but know what they're doing when it comes to publishing a book. They are the experts. And thank you to people like Hala and the other people at Atmosphere. They got it in spades.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. It's like this really vulnerable process, but you know, that's what definitely takes that to the next level. So, definitely, I'm not surprised to hear you say that, Dee. What about you, Robin? Anything that you think is absolutely key to ask an editor when you're talking to them about your manuscript?
I find for me, I really want somebody to read it and make sure everything is still making sense. I don't tend to write outlines. So when I write kind of jumbled and then I fill in, and sometimes things can get lost in the shuffle. So I really need another eye to follow and make sure everything is following the way it is. Usually it is, but I've gotten some great feedback actually from Atmosphere, like what's going on here? And they didn't make a suggestion, they just asked the question, and I realized, oh, I need to fix that.
Yeah, that's definitely what I always need. So,
Yeah.
totally on the same wavelength with that. And what about you, Bill? What is something that you always want to know that you're asking editors at that stage?
Well, I think the first question is to ask them is, please like it. Um, and but I think the real question for that relationship, particularly if it's new to you, is please tell me the truth. Really tell me what you think. I don't want to. I don't want to listen. I don't need a snow job. I need to know what needs to be done that you think needs to be done. Now, maybe I might not agree with it, but as Dee just said, uh, most editors have a lot more experience at what they're doing than I did. And so as a result, I appreciate what they had to say. And particularly, again, my compliments to Atmosphere too, because my very first editor who looked at the manuscript found things that I didn't even realize were there, you know, that I'd looked at it 1,000 times. And if I hadn't been listening very closely and believing what he said, then I wouldn't have gotten the benefit of that. And I think the book has benefited from it. So I think that's what you should ask always. Tell me the truth.
Yeah, sometimes that brutal honesty is hard, but it's so key. It's so necessary to really take your work to the next level. So, It's always a good thing to be asking for that. We have so many great questions, and I want to encourage everyone to get in touch with us and with the authors to discuss more at length. At this point, though, I do want to say thank you to all three of our authors for being here with us on this event, sharing your stories, also a lot of great thoughts in this Q&A. So thank you to Robin, thank you to Dee, and of course to Bill for being here with us today. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining as well, because it's always great to be able to celebrate such wonderful work with a bunch of people. So don't forget also that you can order Sugar-Free, Network Apprentice, and Not the Same River from the links that I just put in the chat one more time. And then please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or submit a book manuscript of your own. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and let us know that you attended today's event. We'll look forward to hearing from you, but until then, that's it. So have a great rest of your week and a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. God bless
Thank you,
you.
Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you.